October 13th, 1944. 22,000 feet above the Rhine Valley. Hauptmann Werner Barker couldn't see what was killing his squadron. In the moonless darkness, 3 Messerschmitt 262s had simply vanished from formation, transformed into fireballs that plunged earthward without warning. No engine sound, no tracer fire, just sudden catastrophic destruction erupting from the void. Then Beck's radar warning receiver lit up. Something was tracking him in the darkness, something invisible, something that shouldn't exist. German night fighter doctrine, perfected over 4 years of brutal warfare, had never prepared him for this. The hunters had become the hunted, and they couldn't see their executioner. The aircraft stalking Beck through the October darkness was the Northrop P-61 Black Widow, America's purpose-built nocturnal killer. Within minutes, Beck would join dozens of German pilots, discovering that Allied air superiority no longer ended at sunset. The night, once Germany's sanctuary, had become a killing field. What happened in the skies over Germany between October 1944 and May 1945 represented a technological and tactical revolution. The P-61 didn't just hunt German aircraft, it dominated the nocturnal battlefield with capabilities that seemed impossible to pilots trained in visual combat. This is the story of how American engineering created a night fighter that terrified the Luftwaffe's most experienced crews, turning darkness from German advantage into American weapon. The Black Widow emerged from a 1940 requirement that seemed almost impossible. The US Army Air Corps, watching RAF night fighters struggle against German bombers over Britain, wanted something unprecedented. A fighter specifically designed for radar-equipped nocturnal interception, with enough firepower to destroy bombers in a single pass, sufficient speed to catch anything flying at night, and the endurance to patrol for hours in darkness. Most aviation experts considered these requirements contradictory. Night fighters were supposed to be converted bombers or modified day fighters, not purpose-built machines. Northrop Aircraft's Jack Northrop thought differently. The XP-61 prototype that first flew on May 26, 1942, shocked everyone who saw it. With a 66-foot wingspan exceeding that of most medium bombers, twin booms supporting a massive tail assembly, and a central nacelle bristling with weapons, it looked like something from science fiction. At 20,000 pounds empty weight, it was nearly twice as heavy as the P-47 Thunderbolt. The crew of 3, pilot, radar operator and gunner, sat in a pressurized central nacelle that resembled a glass house, providing visibility that day fighter pilots envied. But the real revolution was invisible. The SCR-720 airborne intercept radar, mounted in the aircraft's nose, could detect enemy aircraft at ranges exceeding 4 miles in complete darkness. The system, derived from British AI Mark IV technology, but substantially improved by American engineers, gave the Black Widow eyes that penetrated night with superhuman clarity. The radar operator, seated behind the pilot, could track multiple targets simultaneously, guiding the pilot into firing position without ever seeing the enemy visually. Lieutenant Hermann Ernst, one of the first radar operators trained on the system, described the experience. It was like having X-ray vision in the dark. Contacts appeared on the scope as blips of light, each one an enemy aircraft that had no idea we could see them. The Germans had owned the night since 1940. Suddenly we owned it. The weaponry was equally revolutionary. 4 20mm Hispano cannons mounted in the belly could fire 650 rounds per minute, each projectile weighing 4 ounces and travelling at 2,150 feet per second. Unlike rifle-caliber machine guns that required sustained fire, the 20mm shells could tear aircraft apart with just a few hits. The standard ammunition load mixed high explosive incendiary and armour-piercing rounds, ensuring destruction of any aircraft caught in the fire pattern. Early models also carried 4 Browning M2 machine guns in a remote-controlled dorsal turret, adding to the firepower, though this turret was later removed on many aircraft due to buffeting issues. The first P-61 units arrived in England in May 1944, assigned to the 402nd Night Fighter Squadron. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Orris Johnson, had spent months training his crews in the intricacies of radar interception. The challenge was teaching pilots and radar operators to work as a seamless team, the pilot flying the aircraft while maintaining constant communication with the radar operator, who literally couldn't see outside the aircraft. The learning curve was steep. Night flying required skills that day fighter pilots never developed. Without visual references, pilots relied entirely on instruments, making decisions in complete darkness while travelling at 300 miles per hour. The radar operators needed to interpret screen images that experienced observers could read like books, but that looked like meaningless static to novices. Gunners, when the dorsal turret was installed, had to track targets they could barely see, relying on tracers and instinct. Training accidents claimed lives. Between January and June 1944, the 422nd lost 6 aircraft and 11 crew members in operational accidents. Night flying in a 30,000-pound twin-engine fighter pushed pilot skills to their limits. The P-61, despite its size, was surprisingly maneuverable, but it required constant attention. The twin Pratt & Whitney R2800 engines, the same power plants used in P-47s, delivered 2,000 horsepower each, giving the massive fighter a top speed of 366 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. In a dive, Black Widows could exceed 400 miles per hour, faster than most German bombers and many fighters. The Black Widow's combat debut came on the night of July 3, 1944, over the Normandy beachhead. First Lieutenant Hermann Ernst, the same radar operator who had marvelled at the radar's capabilities during training, was flying with Captain Thaddeus Spiele when they intercepted a German bomber approaching the invasion beaches. Ernst's mission report captured the revolutionary nature of radar intercept. Detected contact at 6 miles, altitude 8,000 feet, heading west toward the beaches. Pilot turned to intercept course, closed to 1,000 feet, maintaining position below and behind target. Visual contact confirmed Dornier 217. Pilot moved to firing position 400 feet directly astern. Fired 2-second burst. Target exploded. From initial detection to destruction, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. The enemy never knew we were there. This became the Black Widow pattern. Silent approach guided by radar, positioning in the enemy's blind spot, a brief burst of cannon fire, and the target's destruction. German bomber crews, accustomed to fighting night fighters that they could at least see or hear approaching, faced an invisible enemy that killed without warning. The psychological effect on German aircrews was immediate and devastating. Luftwaffe bomber pilots began reporting mysterious losses, aircraft that simply disappeared without radio calls, without witnessing fighters, without any indication of combat. Intelligence officers initially blamed mechanical failures or poor weather. The truth was worse. The Americans had fielded a night fighter that operated beyond German sensory capabilities. By August 1944, Black Widows were operating over Germany itself. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron deployed to forward bases in France, putting them within range of German airfields. The tactics evolved rapidly. Rather than waiting for enemy aircraft to approach Allied positions, P-61s began offensive patrols over German territory, hunting aircraft in their own airspace. Major August Geiger, a Luftwaffe night fighter ace with 43 victories, encountered a Black Widow on the night of August 17, 1944, while returning from a mission. Geiger, flying a Messerschmitt Bf-110 equipped with Germany's own airborne radar, detected the American fighter on his Liechtenstein system. His experience of the encounter, recorded in his post-war debriefing, revealed German shock at American capabilities. "I detected aircraft following me at 2 kilometers. I assumed British Mosquito and began evasive maneuvers. Standard procedure: dive, turn, climb, break radar lock. The contact stayed with me through every maneuver. Impossible. No night fighter could track like this. I called for assistance, transmitted position. Then my radar exploded. Shells tore through the fuselage. I never saw the attacker, never heard engines, nothing but death arriving from darkness." Geiger survived by bailing out, his aircraft falling in flames near Frankfurt. When he reported being shot down by an aircraft he never saw, intelligence officers were skeptical. But similar reports flooded in from other crews. The Americans had a night fighter, superior to anything Germany possessed. The Black Widow's radar gave it capabilities that seemed almost supernatural to German pilots. The SCR-720 system could track aircraft through clouds, through darkness so absolute that human eyes were useless. The radar operator could guide the pilot into perfect firing position, while the enemy flew obliviously, believing darkness provided protection. Lieutenant Eugene Axtell, a radar operator with the 425th Night Fighter Squadron, described the feeling of omniscience. You're sitting in darkness, surrounded by instruments and scopes, but you can see everything. That blip on the screen is a German bomber. The pilot thinks he's invisible. You watch him change course, climb, dive. You anticipate every move. You guide your pilot into position. The German has no idea death is 500 feet behind him. Then the cannons fire and he ceases to exist. It's surgical. It's terrifying. It's absolute. The firepower demonstration came on September 15, 1944, when Lieutenant Paul Smith of the 422nd encountered a formation of 3 Junkers, Ju-88 bombers near Aachen. Smith's radar operator, Lieutenant Robert Graham, detected the formation at 5 miles. The Germans were flying in loose formation, separated by about 400 yards at 12,000 feet. Smith positioned his Black Widow 1,000 feet below and behind the trailing aircraft. The first Ju-88 died in 3 seconds. Smith fired a 1-second burst from all 4 20mm cannons. The high explosive rounds detonated along the bomber's fuselage, rupturing fuel tanks and severing control cables. The aircraft nosed over and plunged earthward in flames. The second bomber, alerted by the explosion behind them, began evasive maneuvers. Smith followed, guided by Graham's calm instructions. The German pilot threw his aircraft through violent turns, trying desperately to shake the unseen pursuer. The Black Widow, despite its size, turned with the bomber. Smith closed to 300 feet and fired again. This time the bomber's wings separated from the fuselage, spinning away into darkness. The third bomber's pilot panicked and dove for the ground, trying to escape into the terrain. Smith followed the descent, his radar tracking every move. At 3,000 feet, with the ground approaching rapidly, Smith fired his final burst. The bomber, already low and slow, absorbed the cannon shells and disintegrated fragments scattering across the German countryside. From first contact to final kill, 6 minutes, 40 seconds, 3 bombers destroyed. The Germans never landed a shot. The engagement demonstrated everything that terrified German aircrews about the Black Widow. It was faster than their bombers, more maneuverable than expected for its size, could see in absolute darkness, and carried firepower that guaranteed kills. Reports of Smith's triple kill spread through the 422nd Squadron. More significantly, they spread through the Luftwaffe. German bomber crews began refusing night missions over areas where Black Widows operated. The Americans were systematically hunting Germany's nocturnal force into extinction. By October 1944, 5 night fighter squadrons equipped with P-61s operated over Europe. The 422nd, 425th, 414th, 415th, and 416th. Each squadron fielded 18 aircraft. Together they created a nocturnal killing zone that German aircraft entered at their peril. The Black Widow's operational profile was unique among Allied fighters. Typical missions lasted 4 to 5 hours, with aircraft patrolling at altitudes between 10,000 and 25,000 feet. The crews operated in complete radio silence and less engaging enemy aircraft, maintaining the element of surprise. The pressurized cockpit allowed comfortable operation at high altitude, unlike German night fighters where crews suffered from oxygen deprivation and extreme cold. Navigation was accomplished through a combination of ground-based radio beacons and the radar operator's skill at identifying terrain features on the scope. Rivers, coastlines, and cities showed distinctive signatures that experienced operators could read like maps. This capability allowed Black Widows to operate in weather that grounded other aircraft. Captain Lee Kendall of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron flew a mission on November 3, 1944, that demonstrated the Black Widow's all-weather capability. Heavy clouds covered Germany from ground level to 20,000 feet. Visibility was zero. No German aircraft were expected to fly in such conditions. Kendall and his radar operator, Lieutenant James Howard, launched anyway, betting that some German pilot would be desperate or foolish enough to attempt flight. 3 hours into the patrol, Howard detected a contact at 7 miles, altitude 15,000 feet inside the cloud deck. The German pilot, probably disoriented and lost, was flying erratically, changing course every few minutes. Kendall positioned the Black Widow in the clouds, tracking purely by radar, with no visual reference whatsoever. At 500 feet separation, both aircraft were completely enveloped in clouds so dense that Kendall couldn't see his own wingtips. Howard guided him closer. At 300 feet, Kendall fired into the darkness. The tracers from his cannons disappeared into the murk. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then a massive fireball erupted ahead, visible even through the dense clouds. The German aircraft, later identified as a Heinkel He-111 bomber, had exploded catastrophically. Kendall flew through the debris field, fragments clanging against his fuselage. When he landed, ground crews counted 17 impact marks on the Black Widow's skin. The Germans had not fired a shot. The bomber had simply exploded when the 20mm shells found it. This kill, accomplished in conditions where visual combat was impossible, demonstrated the paradigm shift that radar represented. German pilots trained for 4 years in visual interception tactics faced an enemy that didn't need to see them. The night sky, once Germany's advantage, had become their execution chamber. The Black Widow's versatility extended beyond pure interception. Beginning in December 1944, P-61s began flying intruder missions, offensive patrols over German airfields designed to catch aircraft during takeoff and landing. These missions, extraordinarily dangerous, required pilots to loiter near heavily defended air bases, waiting for targets. Captain Tadas Spellis, now a veteran with 5 kills, flew an intruder mission near Stuttgart on December 22, 1944, that became legendary in the Form 22nd Squadron. Spellis positioned his Black Widow at 8,000 feet near a known Luftwaffe night fighter base. His radar operator, Lieutenant Raymond Mooney, monitored German radio frequencies, listening for indications of activity. At 02:43 hours, runway lights illuminated, a Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighter began its takeoff roll. Spellis dove toward the airfield, racing the German aircraft. The Bf 110 lifted off, gear retracting. Spellis, diving at full power, closed to firing range just as the German fighter reached 500 feet altitude. The cannon burst lasted 1 second. The Bf 110, still climbing, absorbed the shells and exploded, falling back onto the airfield. Secondary explosions erupted as the wreckage struck fuel storage tanks. The entire airfield was suddenly illuminated by massive fires. Spellis turned away, accelerating to escape the now alerted anti-aircraft defences. But Mooney detected another contact, another aircraft taking off from the chaos below. A second night fighter, attempting to escape the burning base, was climbing rapidly. Spellis turned toward the contact. The German pilot, seeing the fires behind him and knowing American aircraft were in the area, pushed his throttles forward, trying desperately to gain speed and altitude. The Black Widow, diving from 8,000 feet, had insurmountable energy advantage. Spellis closed to 400 feet and fired again. The second Bf 110 joined the first, falling into the inferno below, 2 kills in 90 seconds. The intruder mission had claimed 2 of Germany's specialized night fighters, aircraft that required months to build and crews that required years to train. Spellis returned to base as dawn broke, his Black Widow silhouetted against the lightening sky. The 422nd Squadron intelligence officer noted in his report, "The Germans are learning that darkness no longer protects them. Every airfield is a potential killing ground. Every takeoff and landing is an invitation to death." The psychological warfare aspect of Black Widow operations became increasingly important. German air crews developed Black Widow anxiety, physical symptoms of stress appearing when night missions were scheduled. Veterans who had flown hundreds of combat missions reported feeling hunted, constantly looking over their shoulders for an enemy they couldn't see. Oberleutnant Franz Holtzmann, a night fighter pilot with 31 victories, wrote in his diary in January 1945, "We used to own the night. British mosquitoes were dangerous, yes, but you could see them, hear them, fight them. These American machines are different. They find you in darkness, in clouds, in conditions where combat should be impossible. You fly along believing you're alone, and suddenly your aircraft is tearing itself apart from cannon fire. No warning, no chance, just instant death arriving from void. The men are terrified. I'm terrified. Every mission might be your last, and you'll never see what kills you." By February 1945, Luftwaffe bomber operations had virtually ceased in areas where Black Widows operated. The few aircraft that did fly did so at extreme low altitude, below radar coverage, accepting the risks of terrain collision rather than face American night fighters at medium altitude. German night fighter forces, once the pride of the Luftwaffe, were reduced to defensive operations near their own bases, hoping to catch Allied bombers in predictable patterns. But even this proved futile as Black Widows began hunting German night fighters specifically to turning the predators into prey. The ultimate demonstration of Black Widow dominance came on March 3, 1945, when Captain Lee Kendall of the 415th Squadron encountered Major Rudolf Schonert, one of Germany's leading night fighter aces, with 64 confirmed kills. Schonert, flying a Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter modified for night operations, represented Germany's last hope for technological superiority. The Me-262, with its 540-mile-per-hour top speed, should have been untouchable. But jet engines of 1945 had a fatal flaw. They produced massive infrared signatures visible to experienced observers even in darkness. Kendall's radar operator, Lieutenant Robert Tierney, detected the jet at extreme range, the unusual radar return indicating something different from standard aircraft. Kendall positioned for intercept, but the jet's speed advantage was immediately apparent. In level flight, the Me-262 was pulling away effortlessly. Kendall climbed to 28,000 feet and waited. Schonert, unaware he'd been detected, began a standard patrol pattern, flying precise courses that would intercept Allied bomber streams. His discipline was his downfall. Kendall predicted the pattern and positioned his Black Widow in the jet's projected path. When Schonert turned onto his next patrol leg, Kendall was waiting 2,000 feet above him. The Black Widow rolled inverted and dove, accelerating past 400 miles per hour. The massive twin-engine fighter, built like a truck, became a precision instrument in Kendall's hands. At 600 feet separation, closing at combined speed exceeding 900 miles per hour, Kendall fired. The 20 Flynn-Leiter shells, fired in a 1-second burst, found their mark. Schonert's jet, struck in both engines, disintegrated. The pilot ejected successfully, landing near Magdeburg, where he was captured by American forces 2 days later. In post-war interrogation, Schonert's statement revealed the complete reversal of technological advantage. I was flying the most advanced aircraft in the world, faster than any Allied fighter, equipped with radar, armed with heavy cannon. Yet the American night fighter detected me first, tracked me without my knowledge, and shot me down before I knew I was engaged. The Me-262 was supposed to restore German air superiority. Instead, I discovered we had already lost. The Americans had built a night fighter better than anything we imagined possible. The Black Widow's radar operator position represented a revolution in aerial warfare. These men, typically younger than pilots, and often with technical backgrounds, developed skills that would define modern air combat. They learned to interpret radar returns, distinguishing aircraft from ground clutter, identifying aircraft types by their radar signatures, and guiding pilots through complex intercepts in three-dimensional darkness. Lieutenant William Leverett, a radar operator with the 414th Night Fighter Squadron, achieved 12 confirmed kills without ever seeing an enemy aircraft visually. He described the almost supernatural feeling of radar interception. You're hunting invisible prey with invisible weapons. The radar shows a blip. Could be anything. You study the movement, the altitude, the speed. German bomber. You tell the pilot left turn 20 degrees, climb to Angels 12. He does it without question, flying blind through darkness. The blip gets closer. 8 miles, 6 miles, 4 miles. You're vectoring him like guiding a missile. 2 miles, 1 mile. You tell him target at 11 o'clock, 500 feet below. He looks and sees nothing. You tell him trust the scope. He drops the nose, adjust heading. Then suddenly he sees it. A shadow against shadows. He fires. The shadow becomes a fireball. You've killed something you never saw with your eyes. It's like being a hunter who shoots through walls. The technical sophistication of the SCR-720 radar was extraordinary for 1944 technology. The system used vacuum tubes, hundreds of them, each hand-selected and tested. The display showed range on the horizontal axis, angle off on the vertical axis. Experienced operators could track 4 separate targets simultaneously, sorting through multiple contacts to find priority threats. The radar's range exceeded 15 miles under ideal conditions, though practical detection ranges were typically 6 to 8 miles. The system's weakness was ground clutter, reflections from terrain that could mask low-flying aircraft. But above 5,000 feet, the radar provided nearly omniscient awareness. German attempts to develop countermeasures failed. Chaff, strips of aluminum foil dropped to create false radar returns, proved ineffective against the SCR-720's sophisticated signal processing. German electronic warfare specialists discovered that American radar operated on frequencies their equipment couldn't detect. Attempts to jam the system failed because the Germans didn't know what frequencies to jam. The Black Widow units developed an esprit de corps unique among Army Air Forces squadrons. Operating at night, often alone, deep over enemy territory, the crews formed bonds strengthened by shared danger and mutual dependence. Pilot and radar operator partnerships became legendary. Some teams flew together for entire tours, developing almost telepathic communication. The three-man crews of pilot, radar operator, and gunner, when the dorsal turret was installed, functioned as a single entity, making split-second decisions in darkness at 300 miles per hour. Ground crews working night shifts to keep aircraft operational shared the nocturnal existence. Maintenance on the Black Widow was complex and demanding. The twin R2800 engines required constant attention. The radar system, using hundreds of vacuum tubes, needed daily testing and calibration. The 20mm cannons required precise alignment and harmonization. Yet availability rates remained high, typically 85%, testament to crew chiefs who understood that pilot lives depended on their work. By April 1945, as Germany collapsed, Black Widow units were achieving kill rates that defied pre-war predictions. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron alone claimed 73 confirmed German aircraft destroyed, with dozens more probables. The 425th added 48 confirmed kills. Across all 5 squadrons, confirmed kills exceeded 150 German aircraft, with actual numbers likely much higher due to combat occurring in conditions where confirmation was difficult. The statistical superiority was staggering. Black Widows achieved approximately a 50-to-1 kill ratio, losing only 3 aircraft to enemy action, while destroying over 150 German planes. This ratio exceeded even the vaunted P-51 Mustang's performance, and made the Black Widow proportionally the most successful American fighter of the European War. The losses that did occur demonstrated the dangers of night operations. Lieutenant James Lang of the 415th Squadron crashed during a night landing approach on January 14, 1945, when his aircraft struck trees while descending through low clouds. The crew of 3 perished. Lieutenant Edward Kopsel of the 422nd was shot down by German anti-aircraft fire on February 8, 1945, while making a low-level strafing run. He survived but spent the war's final months as a POW. Lieutenant Raymond Wild of the 425th was lost on March 22, 1945, under circumstances never fully explained. His aircraft simply disappeared during a routine patrol. No distress call, no wreckage found. The night had claimed one of its hunters, but these losses, tragic as they were, paled compared to German casualties. By war's end, Black Widows had destroyed a significant portion of Germany's remaining night bomber and night fighter forces. More importantly, they had destroyed German morale. The psychological impact of losing air superiority even at night was devastating. In the Pacific theatre, Black Widows proved equally dominant. The 6th Night Fighter Squadron, operating from Guadalcanal beginning in June 1944, encountered Japanese aircraft that were even less prepared for radar-equipped fighters than Germans had been. Japanese air crews, trained in visual combat, had no concept of fighting an enemy they couldn't see. Lieutenant Dale Haberman of the 6th Night Fighter Squadron achieved 6 confirmed kills in a single night on June 30, 1944, intercepting a Japanese bomber formation attacking American positions. Haberman's radar operator, Lieutenant Raymond Mooney, the same officer who had flown with Tadas Spelis in Europe before transferring to the Pacific, guided him through the formation like a scythe through wheat. Each bomber died with a single burst. The Japanese, lacking any electronic warning systems, never knew what was hunting them. By the time the 6th bomber exploded, the formation had scattered in panic, some aircraft fleeing so desperately they flew into the ocean. The Pacific Theatre demonstrated another Black Widow advantage: range. With auxiliary fuel tanks, P-61s could patrol for 6 hours, covering vast areas of ocean and jungle. This endurance allowed them to maintain standing patrols over critical areas, providing continuous protection that would have required multiple shorter-range fighters operating in shifts. The Black Widow's versatility extended to ground attack in both theatres. Though designed as a pure interceptor, combat conditions demanded flexibility. P-61s began carrying bombs and rockets, attacking German and Japanese ground targets during nocturnal interdiction missions. The aircraft proved surprisingly effective in this role, the radar allowing precise navigation to targets in complete darkness. Lieutenant Colonel Phineas Merrill, commanding the 427th Night Fighter Squadron in the Pacific, led a ground attack mission on March 15, 1945, against Japanese positions on Luzon that demonstrated this capability. 8 Black Widows, each carrying 4 500-pound bombs, struck Japanese bunker complexes in absolute darkness. The radar operators identified terrain features, guiding pilots to the target area with precision that shocked observers. The bombs, released from 5,000 feet, destroyed the bunker complex. Japanese survivors reported the attack seemed to come from nowhere. Bombs falling from invisible aircraft in darkness so complete they couldn't see their own hands. The psychological impact of nocturnal precision bombing added another dimension to Black Widow terror. The technical achievement represented by the Black Widow cannot be overstated. In 1940, practical airborne radar barely existed. By 1944, American engineers had created a system sophisticated enough to detect, track, and engage aircraft in conditions where visual contact was impossible. The SCR-720 radar used technology that would seem primitive by modern standards: vacuum tubes, analog displays, manual tracking, yet it performed tasks that seemed magical to contemporary observers. The aircraft's design integrated radar, weapons, and crew in ways that wouldn't be matched until the 1950s. The pressurized cabin allowed high-altitude operations in comfort. The twin-boom configuration provided stable gun platform and excellent visibility. The massive size, initially seen as disadvantage, proved beneficial, providing space for equipment, fuel, and robust structure that absorbed battle damage. Northrop's engineering team had created something genuinely new, not a modified bomber or enlarged day fighter, but an aircraft designed from the start around the mission of nocturnal interception. Every aspect of the design reflected this purpose, from the radar operator's station with its sophisticated displays to the cannon placement optimized for dead-ahead firing. The production achievement matched the technical success. Northrop, a relatively small company, produced 706 P-61s between 1943 and 1945. Each aircraft required approximately 50,000 man-hours to build. The SCR-720 radar alone took 400 hours to install and calibrate. The 20-centimeter cannons required precise bore sighting to ensure all 4 weapons converged at the selected range. Yet quality remained high throughout production. In-service failure rates were remarkably low, testament to manufacturing excellence. The cost was substantial. Each P-61 cost approximately $180,000 in 1944 dollars, nearly double the cost of a P-51 Mustang and triple the cost of a P-47 Thunderbolt. But the investment paid dividends in operational effectiveness. The small number of Black Widows achieved disproportionate results, their specialized capabilities making them worth far more than equivalent numbers of day fighters. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered, Black Widow units had established absolute air supremacy during hours of darkness. No German aircraft flew at night over Western Europe without accepting near-certain death. The psychological transformation was complete. In 1943, darkness had protected German aircraft. By 1945, darkness was where American radar found them and American cannons killed them. The final statistics of P-61 operations in Europe tell a story of complete dominance. 158 confirmed German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. 41 German aircraft destroyed on the ground during strafing attacks. Hundreds of vehicles, locomotives, and installations destroyed during ground attack missions. Only 3 P-61s lost to enemy action. The loss rate, less than 2%, made the Black Widow statistically the safest American fighter to operate in Europe. In the Pacific, the numbers were equally impressive. 72 Japanese aircraft confirmed destroyed in aerial combat. Dozens of additional aircraft destroyed on the ground. Extensive damage inflicted on Japanese ground positions and shipping. 2 P-61s lost to enemy action. The mathematical superiority over German and Japanese night operations was absolute. Post-war interrogations of German pilots revealed the psychological scars left by Black Widow operations. Oberst Werner Streib, who had commanded German night fighter forces and survived the war, admitted in a 1947 interview, "The American Black Widow terrified us more than any other Allied aircraft. The British Mosquito was dangerous, yes, but you could fight it. Fast, nimble, deadly, but visible. The Black Widow was invisible. It found you with radar we couldn't detect, tracked you through evasive maneuvers no human eye could follow, and killed you with cannon fire from darkness. Our pilots called it Schwarze Witwe after we captured identification documents. The name fit perfectly. Like the spider, it lurked in darkness and killed without warning. Japanese pilot accounts gathered during occupation express similar themes. Commander Minoru Genda, one of Japan's most experienced aviators, stated, "American night fighters made nocturnal operations impossible. We would send bombers and they would disappear. No radio calls, no warning, just vanished." When we investigated, we found wreckage showing cannon damage, but no one saw attacking aircraft. No one heard engines. The Americans had made darkness their weapon. We had no defense. The Black Widow's legacy extended far beyond World War II. The lessons learned in radar interception informed all subsequent night fighter development. The crew coordination between pilot and radar operator became standard in all-weather interceptors. The integration of advanced sensors with potent weapon systems became the foundation of modern fighter design. The F-89 Scorpion, F-94 Starfire, and ultimately the F-4 Phantom all descended directly from concepts proven by the Black Widow. The idea that fighters could operate effectively in conditions where visual contact was impossible, that technology could extend human senses beyond natural limitations, that darkness could be conquered through engineering. These concepts transformed air warfare. Modern fighters with their sophisticated radars, infrared sensors, and beyond visual range missiles are the direct descendants of the Black Widow's revolutionary approach. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-61C sits in the World War II gallery. Its black paint, originally designed to make it invisible against night skies, absorbs light even in the museum's artificial illumination. Visitors walk around it, marveling at its size, studying the radar antenna in its nose, examining the 20 Mr. cannons in its belly. Most don't understand what they're looking at. They see an unusual aircraft, oddly configured, interesting but not immediately impressive like the nearby P-51 or P-47. But the veterans who flew against it understood perfectly. In a small display case near the Black Widow is a collection of letters written by German pilots after the war. One, from Oberleutnant Heinz Schmidt, who survived 3 encounters with P-61s, captures the essence of the Black Widow experience. I was a night fighter pilot with 41 victories. I had fought the British for 3 years, survived encounters with mosquitoes, Beaufighters, everything the RAF threw at us. I was experienced, skilled, confident. Then I met the Black Widow. 3 times it found me in darkness. 3 times I survived only through luck and desperate maneuvers. The first time, I didn't know what was shooting at me. Cannon shells tore through my wing, and I saw no attacker. The second time, I saw a shadow for perhaps 1 second before more cannon fire. The third time, I bailed out rather than face it again. That aircraft broke something inside me. It wasn't fear of death. It was fear of fighting something I couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't comprehend. The Americans had created a hunter that operated beyond our senses. How do you fight what you cannot perceive? You don't. You die, and you never know what killed you. Or you bail out and accept captivity rather than face the shadow again. The P-61 Black Widow operated in combat for less than 1 year in Europe, from July 1944 to May 1945. In that brief period, it fundamentally altered the balance of nocturnal air power, transforming night from German sanctuary into American killing field. The flying milk bottles of 1943, the P-47s that Germans had mocked, evolved into fearsome daylight hunters. But the Black Widow needed no evolution. From its first mission, it was the perfect nocturnal predator, combining radar vision, lethal firepower, and crew coordination into an instrument of systematic destruction. German pilots who laughed at the P-47's ungainly appearance in 1943 learned to fear its guns by 1944. But no German pilot ever laughed at the Black Widow. From its first appearance, it inspired only terror. You couldn't see it. You couldn't hear it. You couldn't escape it. The darkness that had protected you became the medium through which death arrived, invisible and inevitable. The thunder of P-47 guns announced American daylight dominance. The silent approach of the Black Widow, tracked only on radar scopes, heralded American ownership of the night. By May 1945, Germany had lost air superiority at all times, all altitudes, all conditions. The sky, day and night, belonged to America. And in the darkness, among the shadows and clouds where German pilots once felt safe, the Black Widow hunted. The Black Widow's operational doctrine evolved rapidly as crews gained experience. Initial tactics, borrowed from British night fighter procedures, proved inadequate for the aircraft's capabilities. The RAF's Mosquito night fighters typically operated as solo hunters, relying on ground controllers to vector them toward targets. The Black Widow's superior radar range and endurance allowed more aggressive tactics. By late 1944, American night fighter squadrons developed the barrier patrol concept, positioning multiple aircraft in staggered altitude layers across known German flight routes. Each Black Widow covered a specific altitude band, creating a three-dimensional net through which no German aircraft could pass undetected. The coordination required was extraordinary, with aircraft maintaining precise positions for hours, while pilots flew on instruments in complete darkness. Captain Raymond Paris of the 425th Night Fighter Squadron perfected this tactic during winter operations over the Rhine Valley. On the night of January 18, 1945, Paris positioned his Black Widow at 15,000 feet as part of a three-aircraft barrier patrol. His wingmen flew at 10,000 and 20,000 feet, creating coverage from near ground level to the stratosphere. German bombers, attempting to attack American supply lines, flew directly into this trap. Paris's radar operator, Lieutenant Donald Myers, detected the first contact at 9 miles. The German formation, 6 Heinkel, Hispano 11 bombers flying in loose trail formation, was proceeding westward at 12,000 feet, completely unaware of the American fighters bracketing their altitude. Paris maneuvered into position behind the trailing bomber while transmitting contact information to his wingmen. The coordination was balletic. As Paris engaged the first bomber, his wingman at 10,000 feet climbed to intercept the second aircraft in the formation. The wingman at 20,000 feet dove on the third. 3 Black Widows, 3 German bombers, 3 separate engagements occurring simultaneously in absolute darkness. Paris fired first. His 2-second burst sent 80 20mm shells into the Heinkel's fuselage. The bomber, carrying a full load of incendiary bombs intended for American positions, exploded with catastrophic force. The fireball illuminated the night sky for miles, revealing the other 2 bombers to Paris's wingmen. Both were destroyed within seconds, their own bomb loads detonating as cannon fire found the ordnance. The remaining 3 German bombers, seeing half their formation transformed into fireballs in less than 10 seconds, jettisoned their bombs and fled eastward. Paris and his wingmen pursued. The chase lasted 20 minutes, covering 60 miles. One by one, the fleeing bombers were run down and destroyed. The Black Widows, with their superior speed and unlimited radar tracking, were relentless. By 0230 hours, all 6 German bombers were destroyed. 3 American aircraft operating in coordinated darkness had annihilated an entire bomber formation without sustaining damage. Paris's mission report filed at dawn was clinically precise. Barrier patrol established at 21:45 hours, first contact at 22:17 hours, 6 enemy aircraft destroyed by 0233 hours, ammunition expenditure, 680 rounds 20mm high explosive incendiary, fuel remaining at landing 240 gallons, assessment, enemy bomber operations in sector effectively suppressed. The effectively suppressed notation was German intelligence confirmed through intercepted communications that bomber units refused to operate in areas where Black Widow barrier patrols were known to be active. The psychological warfare had achieved complete success. The mere possibility of encountering a Black Widow was sufficient to deter German operations. This represented a revolutionary concept in air warfare, achieving air superiority through deterrence rather than actual combat. The Germans simply stopped flying where Black Widows hunted. The technological sophistication of Black Widow operations extended to maintenance and logistics. Each squadron required specialized ground equipment and personnel. The SCR-720 radar demanded constant calibration using test equipment that weighed over 2,000 pounds and required trained technicians to operate. The 20mm Hispano cannons used by the Black Widow were notoriously temperamental, requiring precise headspace and timing adjustments to prevent jams. Ammunition loading was an art form, each cannon's ammunition box holding 200 rounds that had to be loaded in specific sequences to ensure reliable feeding. Technical Sergeant James Morrison, a crew chief with the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, described the maintenance challenge. The P-61 was the most complex aircraft I'd ever worked on, and I'd served on B-17s before transferring to night fighters. The engines were straightforward, big radials like the P-47, but everything else was exotic. The radar had tubes that burned out constantly. We kept hundreds of spares, each one tested before installation. The cannons required daily maintenance, cleaning, headspace checks, timing adjustments. Miss one step and they'd jam in combat, which meant a pilot returning with a dead gun and possibly a dead crew. The electrical system was a nightmare. Miles of wiring running through the fuselage, all of it critical. We worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer, because we knew pilots' lives depended on our work. Every aircraft that launched at dusk had to be perfect. No second chances at night. The ammunition logistics were staggering. Each combat sortie consumed an average of 400 rounds of 20mm ammunition, weighing 180 pounds. With 18 aircraft per squadron flying nightly missions, ammunition consumption exceeded 7,000 rounds per day. The 20mm high explosive incendiary rounds used by Black Widows were manufactured to precise specifications at the Frankfurt Arsenal in Philadelphia. Each shell contained a time delay fuse, explosive charge, and incendiary mixture that ignited on detonation. The manufacturing tolerance was measured in thousandths of an inch. A single defective round could jam the cannon at the critical moment when a pilot needed firepower. Quality control was so stringent that less than 1 round in 10,000 failed in service, a remarkable achievement for 1940s manufacturing. The fuel logistics were equally impressive. Each Black Widow carried 640 gallons of 100-octane aviation gasoline internally, plus up to 310 gallons in external drop tanks. With multiple aircraft flying 4 to 5 hour missions nightly, fuel consumption exceeded 50,000 gallons per week per squadron. This fuel had to be transported to forward bases in France and Germany, often under combat conditions. Fuel trucks, prioritized to keep night fighters operational, delivered aviation gasoline while ground forces sometimes went without vehicle fuel. The winter of 1944-1945 tested Black Widow operations to their limits. The coldest European winter in 50 years brought temperatures that froze hydraulic fluid, made rubber brittle, and turned metal components so cold that touching them with bare skin caused instant frostbite. Night operations in these conditions required extraordinary dedication. Pilots and crews flew in heated flight suits, but temperatures at altitude reached -60 degrees Fahrenheit. Cockpit heating systems struggled to maintain livable conditions. Radar operators, hunched over their scopes for hours, suffered from cold-induced fatigue that degraded performance. Yet operations continued. Lieutenant Robert Belinda of the 414th Night Fighter Squadron flew a mission on February 14, 1945, when ground temperatures reached -15 degrees Fahrenheit and high-altitude temperatures dropped below -70. His radar operator, Lieutenant Kenneth Graham, fought against scope icing throughout the mission, repeatedly clearing frost that formed on the radar display. Despite these conditions, they detected and destroyed a German Junkers Ju-88, attempting a reconnaissance mission over American lines. Belinda's hands were so cold after the 4-hour mission that ground crew had to help him remove his gloves. The gloves had frozen solid to his flight suit, yet he was airborne again the following night, hunting German aircraft through the brutal winter darkness. The dedication of Black Widow crews extended beyond normal duty. These men volunteered for night fighter service, knowing it was among the most dangerous assignments in the Army Air Forces. The accident rate during training was 3 times higher than day fighter training. Combat operations occurred in conditions where a simple mechanical failure meant almost certain death. No emergency landing was possible in darkness over enemy territory. Navigation errors could put aircraft into mountains or over heavily defended cities. Yet volunteers never stopped coming, drawn by the challenge and the revolutionary nature of radar combat. The selection process for night fighter crews was rigorous. Pilots required exceptional instrument flying skills and the ability to make split-second decisions while flying solely by reference to instruments. Radar operators needed technical aptitude, the ability to interpret complex displays, and nerves steady enough to guide pilots through intercepts while unable to see outside the aircraft. The washout rate during training exceeded 40%. Those who completed training entered a brotherhood defined by shared danger and mutual dependence. First Lieutenant Paul Hartman, who completed night fighter training in March 1945, described the experience. They wanted to break you in training, push you to absolute limits to see if you'd crack. Night formation flying where you couldn't see the other aircraft, just instrument references. Radar intercepts against targets that maneuvered violently. Emergency procedures practiced until they were instinctive, because at night, with no visual references, hesitation meant death. I washed out 23 pilots from my class. Good pilots, competent, skilled, but not good enough for night fighters. The 11 of us who graduated, we were the best they could produce. We had to be, because the Black Widow would kill you if you weren't perfect. The aircraft's handling characteristics demanded perfection. Despite its size, the P-61 was sensitive to control inputs, particularly in roll. Pilots who over-controlled found themselves in unusual attitudes with no visual reference to recover. The twin-engine configuration meant that losing an engine at night required immediate, precise control inputs to prevent the aircraft from rolling inverted. The turbo superchargers on each engine had to be synchronized manually, requiring constant attention to prevent asymmetric thrust. Yet in the hands of skilled pilots, the Black Widow was remarkably maneuverable. Test pilots at Wright Field discovered the aircraft could sustain 4G turns, exceptional for an aircraft weighing 30,000 pounds. The stall characteristics were benign, with clear warning buffet before the actual stall. Recovery from spins, should a pilot be foolish enough to enter one, was straightforward if executed immediately. The aircraft's stability allowed pilots to maintain precise instrument flight for hours, critical for the extended patrols that night fighter missions required. Captain Gerald Rounds of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron demonstrated the Black Widow's maneuverability during a daylight encounter on March 8, 1945. Returning from a night mission at dawn, Rounds encountered a German Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter. The jet pilot, confident in his 200 mph speed advantage, attempted to bounce the Black Widow. Rounds, exhausted from 5 hours of nocturnal patrol, reacted instinctively. He threw the massive Black Widow into a hard brake turn, pulling 3.5 G in an aircraft that weighed 32,000 pounds at that moment. The jet, unable to match the turn radius at high speed, overshot. Rounds reversed, getting his cannons pointed at the jet for perhaps 2 seconds. He fired. The burst, less than 1 second, sent 40 20mm shells toward the jet. 10 connected. The Me-262, its engines damaged, attempted to disengage but was streaming fuel. Rounds followed, tracking the jet despite its speed advantage. The German pilot ejected at 12,000 feet, his aircraft falling in flames near Kassel. The kill, achieved in daylight after an exhausting night mission, demonstrated both pilot skill and aircraft capability. Rounds landed with his fuel gauges reading empty, having pushed his Black Widow to absolute limits. The squadron intelligence officer asked how he'd managed to turn with the jet. Rounds replied, "The Black Widow's a big girl, but she can dance when she needs to. That Jerry thought he was bouncing a fat target. He discovered too late that weight doesn't mean sluggish. Those big wings give us turn radius that surprises everyone. He tried to energy fight, but I stayed in his turn and got my nose on him. One chance, one burst, one kill. The Black Widow doesn't need second chances." The aircraft's weapon system was the most sophisticated fitted to any American fighter. The 4 20mm cannons were mounted in the belly, in a package that could be removed as a unit for maintenance. This installation allowed ground crews to remove the entire gun pack, perform necessary maintenance, and install a fresh pack in less than 2 hours. The system meant aircraft weren't grounded for gun maintenance, critical for maintaining operational readiness. The cannons were electrically fired, synchronized to fire through the propeller arc even though they were mounted well aft of the propellers. The synchronization system used a complex mechanical linkage that prevented firing when a propeller blade was in line with the gun barrels. The system added 200 pounds of weight but ensured all 4 cannons could fire without risk of shooting off their own propellers. The ammunition feed system was equally sophisticated. Each cannon had its own electrically driven feed motor that pulled ammunition from the magazine at rates sufficient to support 650 rounds per minute cyclic rate. The system included jam detection sensors that would shut down a malfunctioning gun rather than allow it to hang fire with a live round in the chamber. This automation meant pilots could focus on flying and fighting, while the weapons system managed itself. The sight system for the cannons evolved throughout the war. Early Black Widows used a simple fixed sight with range rings. Pilots aimed by maneuvering the entire aircraft until the sight was aligned with the target, then fired. Later variants received computing gun sights that calculated lead angles based on target motion, range, and aircraft speed. These sights, primitive by modern standards but revolutionary for 1945, increased hit probability by approximately 40%. Lieutenant Colonel Carroll Smith, commanding the 414th Night Fighter Squadron, was among the first to receive the computing gun sight. His first combat mission with the new system, on April 2, 1945, resulted in 3 confirmed kills in 20 minutes. His mission report emphasized the sight's effectiveness. The computing sight eliminates guesswork. You track the target, the sight calculates deflection, you fire when the pipper is on target. First kill, enemy aircraft turning hard left, 300 yards range. Old sight would have required leading the turn and hoping. New sight handled it automatically. 3-second burst, target destroyed. Second kill, enemy diving, crossing left to right. The sight tracked perfectly. 2-second burst, target exploded. Third kill, enemy climbing. The sight compensated for vertical motion. 1-second burst, target disintegrated. Total ammunition expenditure, 260 rounds. 3 kills. The new sight makes night combat almost too easy. The radar system's evolution paralleled weapons development. The original SCR-720 radar, effective but limited, was supplemented in late 1944 with the SCR-720C variant, featuring improved signal processing and longer range. The new radar could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 20 miles under ideal conditions, though practical detection ranges remained around 10 miles. More importantly, the improved radar had better discrimination against ground clutter, allowing it to track low-flying aircraft that earlier versions would have lost in background noise. This improvement was critical as German aircraft increasingly flew at extremely low altitudes to avoid radar detection. Lieutenant Howard Crone, a radar operator with the 425th Night Fighter Squadron, described tracking a low-flying German bomber using the improved radar. Contact at 12 miles, altitude indicated 500 feet. That's absurdly low for night operations, but the German was desperate. Old radar would have lost him in ground clutter. New system tracked him through valleys, between hills, over rivers. I guided the pilot down to 1,000 feet, dangerous as hell at night, but we needed altitude advantage. We tracked that bomber for 18 minutes as he tried every trick to lose us. Flying through valleys, turning constantly, changing altitude. The radar held him the entire time. When we finally got into firing position, he was at 300 feet over farmland. The pilot fired, the bomber exploded, pieces scattered across 5 kilometers. We climbed back to safe altitude. I was shaking from the tension. We tracked and killed an aircraft flying treetop level in absolute darkness. That's how good the new radar was. The integration of improved radar and computing gun sights created a weapons system more sophisticated than anything deployed by any air force in 1945. The Black Widow had evolved from experimental night fighter into precision killing machine. Every system, from radar detection through fire control to cannon performance, had been refined through combat experience into near-optimal configuration. The Germans, aware they were facing technological superiority, attempted various countermeasures. Oberst Victor von Lossberg, commanding the Luftwaffe's Electronic Warfare Research Division, directed a program to develop radar warning receivers that could detect American night fighter radar. The program failed. American radar operated on frequencies that German electronics couldn't detect reliably. The few prototype receivers that showed promise came too late, and in too few numbers to affect operations. German pilots also tried tactical countermeasures. Flying at extremely low altitude reduced radar detection ranges but increased the risk of controlled flight into terrain at night. Some German crews tried flying with navigation lights on, making themselves visible, but also making it obvious they were aware of American presence, hoping this would deter attacks. It didn't. Black Widow pilots fired on anything they detected, lights or no lights. The most desperate German tactic involved deliberately flying through known anti-aircraft coverage. German pilots, knowing American night fighters would follow them on radar, would fly toward German flak batteries, hoping the American pilot would be damaged or deterred by friendly fire. The tactic occasionally worked, but more often resulted in the German aircraft being shot down by their own anti-aircraft guns, which couldn't distinguish friend from foe in darkness. Oberleutnant Wilhelm Gansler, a night bomber pilot who survived the war, described the helplessness of facing Black Widows. "We had no defense. You couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, couldn't evade them. We tried everything. Low altitude, but that was suicide over terrain. High altitude, but they performed better than we did up there. Violent maneuvers, but their radar tracked through everything. We tried flying during full moon, thinking we'd at least see them coming. They shot us down in moonlight just as easily as in darkness. Some crews simply refused to fly. Better face court-martial than face the Black Widow. At least the court-martial left you alive." The impact on German morale extended beyond air crews. Ground forces, aware that American aircraft owned the night sky, became demoralized. The Wehrmacht had relied on nocturnal movement since 1943 to avoid Allied air attacks. By early 1945, even night movement was interdicted by Black Widows. Trucks attempting to move at night were strafed. Trains were destroyed. Command posts illuminated by necessity were attacked. The Germans learned that American night fighters could find and destroy anything that moved or emitted light after dark. Colonel Paul Conrath, commanding a German infantry regiment near the Rhine, wrote in his diary in March 1945, "The Americans hunt us day and night. During day, the fighter-bombers, the Thunderbolts and Mustangs strafe anything that moves. We shelter in forests and buildings, emerging only when absolutely necessary. At night, we once had freedom to move, resupply, reposition. No more. The Black Widows patrol constantly. Any vehicle showing lights is attacked within minutes. Even without lights, they find you somehow." Radio intercepts suggest they have radar, though how aircraft radar can detect vehicles is beyond my understanding. Men are exhausted, supplies critical, ammunition low. We cannot move to resolve any of these problems because American aircraft own the sky around the clock. This is defeat by strangulation. The Black Widow's ground attack capability had evolved significantly from its pure interceptor origins. By 1945, most aircraft carried bombs or rockets for targets of opportunity when no airborne targets were available. The standard ground attack load consisted of 4 500-pound bombs or 8 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets. The ammunition load was modified for ground attack, substituting more armor-piercing rounds for high explosive, optimizing for penetrating vehicles and structures rather than destroying aircraft. The transition from pure night fighter to multi-role attack aircraft occurred gradually as German air activity decreased. By March 1945, Black Widows were finding fewer airborne targets. Rather than waste sorties, squadron commanders authorized ground attack. The results were devastatingly effective. The combination of radar navigation allowing precise target location and heavy firepower made Black Widows superb nocturnal interdiction aircraft. Lieutenant Clyde Philman of the 492nd Night Fighter Squadron flew a ground attack mission on March 28, 1945, that became a case study in nocturnal interdiction. Intelligence had identified a German supply convoy moving at night near Hanau, approximately 60 vehicles including trucks, half-tracks, and horse-drawn wagons. Philman, carrying 4 500-pound bombs, located the convoy using radar by identifying the road and following it until vehicle returns appeared on the scope. The convoy, believing darkness provided protection, was moving with blackout lights only, confident that visual detection was impossible. Philman's radar operator, Lieutenant Robert Tierney, the same officer who had guided Philman to the M262 kill weeks earlier, tracked the convoy for 10 minutes, mapping its route and identifying the densest concentration of vehicles. Philman descended to 3,000 feet, aimed using his computing gun sight coupled with the radar track, and released all 4 bombs in a single pass. The bombs, falling through complete darkness toward targets no human eye could see, struck the convoy's center with precision that seemed impossible for unguided weapons. The explosions destroyed 12 vehicles outright and set 6 more aflame. The fires illuminated the remaining vehicles, now visible to Philman despite the darkness. He reversed and made a strafing pass with his 4 20mm cannons, raking the column from end to end. The cannon fire, 160 rounds in a 4-second burst, destroyed 18 more vehicles. Philman climbed back to altitude as German anti-aircraft fire, late and poorly aimed, filled the space he'd just vacated. Total time from initial radar contact to departing the target area, 8 minutes. Total vehicles destroyed, 30. Ammunition remaining, sufficient for another engagement if targets presented themselves. Filmon's report noted clinically, radar interception of ground target successful. Target identified at 6 miles by road geometry match with intelligence maps. Terminal guidance visual due to fires. Assessment. Convoy destroyed. German supply line interdicted. Recommend continued. Nocturnal ground attack missions against mobile targets. The success of ground attack missions led to development of specialized tactics. Black Widows began coordinating with ground intelligence units, receiving radio calls about German movement, then using radar to locate and destroy the targets. The system created a responsive strike capability that the Germans couldn't counter. Movement at night, once their advantage, became a death sentence. The integration of night fighters into the ground campaign represented a maturation of air power theory. Pre-war doctrine had envisioned fighters as purely air-to-air platforms. The Black Widow demonstrated that advanced technology could create multi-role capabilities that maximized combat effectiveness. The same aircraft that hunted German bombers at 25,000 feet could strike ground targets at low altitude, using its radar to navigate and locate targets in conditions where conventional attack was impossible. By April 1945, as Allied armies advanced deeper into Germany, Black Widow units moved forward to bases in captured German territory. This forward deployment put them within range of targets previously unreachable. German industrial areas, military bases and transportation networks in central Germany came under nocturnal attack by aircraft that could navigate and strike with precision, regardless of weather or darkness. The Luftwaffe, by this point reduced to a shadow force, could mount no effective defense. Fuel shortages grounded most aircraft. Experienced pilots were dead or captured. The few aircraft that did fly operated in desperation, usually single aircraft making supply runs or reconnaissance flights. These aircraft encountered Black Widows that hunted with practiced efficiency. Major Henry Lutterloh, who commanded the 427th Night Fighter Squadron, deployed to captured German airfields in April 1945, described the final weeks of air combat. We flew every night, hunting what remained of the Luftwaffe. Most nights, nothing. The Germans had stopped flying. When we did find aircraft, they were desperate men in worn-out machines. No challenge. We'd detect them on radar, close to visual range, identify them and shoot them down. Most never knew we were there until our cannons fired. It was execution, not combat, but necessary. Every German aircraft destroyed was one that couldn't attack our ground forces. By late April, we were seeing perhaps 1 German aircraft per week in our sector. The Luftwaffe had been annihilated. Day fighters had destroyed them in daylight. We destroyed them at night. There was nothing left. The final confirmed. Black Widow kill of the European war occurred on May 5th, 1945, 3 days before Germany's surrender. Lieutenant Kenneth Schroeder of the 414th Night Fighter Squadron detected a German Ju-88 reconnaissance aircraft at 18,000 feet over Berlin. The German crew, flying one of the last Luftwaffe missions of the war, was photographing Soviet positions for German commanders who still believed the war could be won. Schroeder's radar operator, Lieutenant Paul Matthews, guided him into position. At 400 yards range, Schroeder fired a 3-second burst. The Ju-88, struck by 60 20mm shells, disintegrated. Pieces of the aircraft fell onto Soviet-occupied Berlin, where Red Army soldiers who had never seen a Black Widow wondered what American aircraft had just flown overhead. The war ended 72 hours later. The Black Widow units, with nothing left to hunt, stood down operations. Pilots and crews, exhausted from months of nocturnal combat, struggled to adjust to victory. Many had flown over 100 combat missions, each one lasting 4 to 6 hours in darkness over enemy territory. The stress of night operations, constant vigilance, and the knowledge that any mechanical failure meant death had taken psychological tolls that wouldn't be recognized until years later. In the Pacific Theater, the war continued for 3 more months. Black Widow units operating from bases in the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa maintained pressure on Japanese air forces. The missions were different from European operations. Japanese aircraft, less technologically sophisticated than German ones, relied more on individual pilot skill and less on coordinated formations. Japanese pilots also showed greater willingness to fight to the death rather than disengage when outmatched. This meant Black Widow crews in the Pacific faced enemy pilots who would maneuver violently until destroyed, rather than breaking off when at disadvantage. Lieutenant Russell Decker of the 548th Night Fighter Squadron, operating from Iwo Jima, encountered this Japanese determination on July 14, 1945. Decker detected a Japanese bomber at 12 miles, climbing toward B-29 formations preparing to raid Japan. The bomber, a Mitsubishi Ki-67 Hiryu, was fast and maneuverable for its size. Decker closed to firing range and opened fire. His burst struck the bomber but didn't destroy it. The Japanese pilot, wounded but determined, threw his damaged aircraft into violent evasive maneuvers, turning so hard that Decker struggled to maintain position. For 6 minutes, the engagement continued, the Japanese pilot refusing to surrender or bail out despite his aircraft streaming fuel and fire. Decker fired 3 separate bursts, each causing additional damage. Finally, the Japanese bomber nosed over and dove into the ocean, still under control, the pilot choosing death over capture or retreat. Decker, who had shot down 8 German aircraft in Europe before transferring to the Pacific, noted in his report, "German pilots would disengage when damaged. Japanese pilots fight until they're destroyed. This one took 3 times the damage that would have made a German bailout. He kept fighting even after his aircraft was clearly doomed. Required 180 rounds to achieve kill, triple the normal expenditure." Japanese determination creates extended engagements that consume ammunition and increase risk. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in early August, followed by Japan's surrender on August 15th, ended Black Widow combat operations in the Pacific. The final air combat kill achieved by a P-61 occurred on August 14th, hours before the surrender announcement. Lieutenant Ivan Drury of the 548th Night Fighter Squadron destroyed a Japanese reconnaissance aircraft over the Sea of Japan. Drury never knew his was the final kill. He landed, filed his report, and learned hours later that the war had ended. His kill, achieved in darkness over ocean far from witnesses, was the last act of a conflict that had seen the Black Widow transform from experimental concept to proven war winner. The post-war accounting of Black Widow operations revealed results that exceeded all predictions. In both theatres, P-61s achieved confirmed destruction of over 220 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. Ground attack missions destroyed thousands of vehicles, trains, and installations. The loss rate remained below 2% throughout the war, making the Black Widow statistically the safest American combat aircraft operated in World War II. More importantly, the Black Widow established concepts that would define air warfare for decades. The integration of advanced sensors with powerful weapons, the crew coordination between pilot and systems operator, the ability to operate effectively in all weather and lighting conditions, these capabilities became requirements for all subsequent fighter designs. The F-14 Tomcat, F-15 Eagle, F-16 Fighting Falcon, and F-A-18 Hornet all descended conceptually from the Black Widow's revolutionary approach. The emphasis on beyond visual range combat, pioneered by Black Widow crews killing aircraft they never saw visually, became standard doctrine. Modern air combat, where fighters engage targets at ranges of dozens of miles using radar and missiles, is the direct descendant of Black Widow tactics developed over Germany in 1944 and 1945. The radar operators who guided Black Widow pilots through nocturnal interceptions were the first generation of weapons systems officers, a crew position that became standard in advanced fighters. The F-4 Phantom, F-14 Tomcat, and F-111 Aardvark all carried 2-person crews following the Black Widow model. Even modern single-seat fighters retain the concept, with sophisticated automation performing tasks that Black Widow radar operators did manually. The veterans who flew Black Widows carried memories of nocturnal combat that haunted them for decades. The psychological stress of night operations, flying for hours in darkness, while knowing any mistake meant death, created trauma that 1940s military medicine didn't recognize or treat. Many Black Widow veterans suffered what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, experiencing recurring nightmares of night combat decades after the war. At reunions of night fighter veterans, held annually for decades, after the war, the Black Widow crews shared experiences that they couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't flown nocturnal combat. The sensation of hunting invisible prey through darkness, the tension of radar interceptions where success and failure separated by seconds, the visceral impact of seeing aircraft explode at close range, these experiences bonded them in ways that transcended normal military camaraderie. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Hughes, who commanded the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron and survived the war with 11 confirmed kills, spoke at a 1985 reunion about the psychological impact of night fighting. People who flew day fighters don't understand. They saw their enemies, fought visual battles where skill and courage determined outcomes. We fought in darkness against enemies we rarely saw until we killed them. The radar told us where they were, but they were abstractions on a scope until the moment our cannons fired and they exploded. Then suddenly they were real, men burning to death in aircraft we'd just destroyed. The psychological whiplash, from abstract blip to human immolation in seconds, affected all of us. Some handled it better than others. Some didn't handle it at all. We didn't talk about it during the war. Men who showed weakness were removed from flight status, so we suppressed everything, flew the next mission, killed again, suppressed again. After the war it came out. Nightmares, anxiety, depression. Some drank, some isolated themselves. Some functioned normally for years, then suddenly broke down. The night fighting broke something inside many of us. We were effective, successful, accomplished the mission, but the cost was extracted from our psyches, and we paid it for the rest of our lives. The German pilots who survived encounters with Black Widows carried their own trauma. The experience of being hunted by an invisible enemy, of having comrades destroyed without warning by an aircraft they couldn't see, created psychological wounds that mirrored those of their American opponents. At a 1987 reunion that brought together former German and American night fighter crews, the shared trauma became obvious. Both sides had fought in darkness, both had experienced the terror of night combat, both carried scars that couldn't be seen. Former Oberst Werner Hoffmann, who had commanded a German night fighter unit and survived multiple encounters with Black Widows, spoke emotionally about the commonality of experience. We were enemies in war. We tried to kill each other. Your Black Widows destroyed many of my men. But we shared something that daylight pilots never experienced. The night. Fighting in darkness, where every mission might end with controlled flight into terrain, where navigation error meant flying into mountains, where mechanical failure meant bailing out into blackness with no idea what was below. The Americans had better technology. They had radar that we couldn't match. But we all faced the same darkness, the same fear, the same stress. I hated the Black Widow during the war. It killed my friends. But I respect the men who flew it. Night fighting requires courage that daylight combat doesn't demand. We were all brave men, German and American, and the darkness tested us equally. The technical personnel who maintained Black Widows carried their own pride in achievement. The crew chiefs, radar technicians, armourers, and engine mechanics who kept the aircraft operational, despite difficult conditions and constant pressure, took satisfaction in knowing their work had contributed to victory. Master Sergeant Robert Coleman, who served as crew chief on a Black Widow throughout the European campaign, described the satisfaction of maintenance excellence. My aircraft, that was how I thought of it, flew 73 combat missions without mechanical abort. 73 times it launched into darkness, and 73 times it returned safely with its crew alive. The pilot got credit for 11 kills. I got credit for nothing in official records, but I know the truth. Those 11 kills happened because the engines ran perfectly, because the radar worked flawlessly, because the guns fired when the pilot pressed the trigger. That was my contribution. I kept that machine in perfect condition despite cold, despite mud, despite fatigue, despite shortages of parts. The pilot trusted his life to my work every time he flew. I never betrayed that trust. The aircraft never failed him. That's what I'm proud of. The Black Widow's service didn't end with World War II. The aircraft continued in US service until 1952, serving with Air Defense Command as an interim night fighter until jet-powered replacements entered service. The transition from World War II to Cold War occurred seamlessly, with Black Widow crews who had hunted Germans and Japanese now training to intercept Soviet bombers. The mission changed, the enemy changed, but the basic requirements remained the same: detect, intercept, and destroy enemy aircraft at night in all weather conditions. Some Black Widows were converted to F-15A reporter photo reconnaissance aircraft, with cameras replacing the cannon armament. These aircraft served in Korea during the Korean War, conducting nocturnal reconnaissance missions over North Korean and Chinese positions. The radar navigation capability that had allowed them to hunt enemy aircraft now guided them over target areas for photography. One F-15A was shot down by anti-aircraft fire in 1952, the last Black Widow lost to enemy action. The technological legacy of the P-61 extended far beyond its service life. The lessons learned in developing and operating the Black Widow informed every subsequent American night fighter and all-weather interceptor program. The radar operator's position became standard. The emphasis on sustained firepower was validated. The multi-role capability was expanded. The F-89 Scorpion, which replaced the Black Widow in service, was essentially a jet-powered evolution of the same concept. Later aircraft, including the F-101 Voodoo, F-106 Delta Dart, and ultimately the F-14 Tomcat, all descended from the Black Widow's pioneering design. In museums today, the surviving P-61 Black Widows sit as monuments to technological revolution. Only 4 complete aircraft survive, one at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, one at the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, one undergoing restoration at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum in Reading, Pennsylvania, and one at the Beijing Aviation Museum in China, captured from nationalist Chinese forces in 1949. These aircraft, their black paint faded to grey, their radar systems long since removed, their cannons demilitarized, represent a revolution in warfare that changed everything. Visitors walk past them, often giving them less attention than flashier aircraft nearby. The P-61 lacks the elegant lines of the P-51 Mustang, the brutal purposefulness of the P-47 Thunderbolt, the exotic appeal of captured German jets. It looks odd, ungainly, a collection of parts that shouldn't fit together but somehow do. Most visitors don't understand what they're seeing. They're looking at the aircraft that ended the night as sanctuary for enemy forces, that created the modern concept of all-weather combat capability, that demonstrated the dominance of technology over traditional fighting methods. The statistical summary of Black Widow operations tells a story of complete dominance, but doesn't capture the human experience. Over 220 confirmed aerial victories against loss of fewer than 5 aircraft to enemy action represents mathematical superiority. But behind those numbers are individual stories of courage, fear, skill, and sacrifice. Stories like that of Lieutenant Dale Haberman, who achieved 6 kills in one night over the Pacific, then died in a training accident 3 weeks later when his aircraft suffered engine failure on takeoff. Stories like that of Lieutenant Robert Tierney, the radar operator who guided his pilot to 12 confirmed kills without ever seeing an enemy aircraft visually, who returned home with psychological trauma so severe he couldn't enter darkrooms for years. Stories like that of Technical Sergeant Raymond Morrison, a crew chief who kept his assigned aircraft operational through an entire combat tour, who received no decoration or recognition, who died in obscurity in 1978 with his contributions known only to the crew whose lives his maintenance excellence had preserved. The German perspective on the Black Widow, gathered through post-war interviews and captured documents, reveals the psychological impact of facing technologically superior opponents. Luftwaffe veterans who had fought the RAF for years, who had survived combat against Spitfires and Hurricanes and Mosquitoes, described the Black Widow in terms of almost supernatural dread. The British aircraft had been dangerous but comprehensible, fast fighters that fought visual battles where skill could equalize technological differences. The Black Widow was incomprehensible, an enemy that saw through darkness, that found aircraft that believed themselves invisible, that killed with precision that seemed impossible. Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, Germany's leading night fighter ace with 121 victories, encountered Black Widows 3 times in early 1945. Each encounter ended with Schnaufer barely escaping, using every trick accumulated through years of combat. His assessment, recorded in captured Luftwaffe documents, was brutally honest. The American night fighter is superior to anything we possess. Superior radar, superior firepower, superior performance at altitude. Our few remaining night fighters are obsolete, our pilots poorly trained, our tactics ineffective. We once dominated nocturnal combat. The British challenged us. The Americans defeated us. Fighting the Black Widow is suicide. Only luck and desperation keep any of us alive when we encounter them. The industrial achievement represented by the Black Widow program deserves emphasis. Northrop Aviation, a relatively small company in 1940, developed an entirely new class of aircraft, perfected it through multiple variants, and produced over 700 examples in less than 3 years. Each aircraft represented the cutting edge of 1940s technology, incorporating systems and capabilities that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. The fact that these complex machines were manufactured in quantity, maintained in combat conditions, and operated reliably in the harshest environments stands as testimony to American industrial capability. The contrast with German aircraft production is instructive. Germany, with its extensive aviation industry and deep engineering expertise, never fielded a night fighter comparable to the Black Widow. The Heinkel, a Tu-19 Uhu, came closest, incorporating airborne radar and heavy cannon armament in a dedicated night fighter design. But only Tu-68 were produced, compared to over 700 Black Widows. The Tu-19 suffered from production problems, supply shortages, and constantly changing requirements that delayed deployment. By the time it entered service in meaningful numbers, the Luftwaffe lacked fuel, pilots, and bases to operate effectively. The Black Widow, by contrast, entered service when American industry was operating at peak efficiency, when pilot training programs were producing skilled crews in large numbers, when logistics networks could support forward-deployed units with necessary supplies and maintenance. The aircraft arrived at the moment when it could achieve maximum impact. The tactical evolution of Black Widow operations demonstrated American military adaptability. The aircraft entered service as a pure night interceptor, designed to defend against enemy bomber attacks. Within months, crews and commanders realized its capabilities extended far beyond that limited role. Offensive patrols over enemy territory, intruder missions against enemy airfields, ground attack against mobile targets, armed reconnaissance over supply routes, all these missions emerged from operational experience rather than pre-war planning. The willingness to adapt doctrine to exploit technological capabilities accelerated American air dominance. German doctrine, by contrast, remained relatively static. Night fighters were assigned defensive missions protecting German cities and industrial areas. Offensive use of night fighters was limited and poorly coordinated. The Luftwaffe had excellent aircraft, skilled pilots, and sophisticated tactics, but they couldn't adapt fast enough to counter American technological and numerical advantages. The organizational rigidity that had served Germany well in the war's early years became a liability when facing opponents who innovated constantly. The Black Widow's crew coordination requirements created a training challenge that the Army Air Forces met through systematic program development. The pilot and radar operator had to function as a single entity, communicating constantly, anticipating each other's needs, maintaining situational awareness while each focused on different aspects of the mission. This crew coordination couldn't be taught through individual training. It required extensive practice with the same partner, developing the almost telepathic understanding that made interceptions in darkness possible. The training program, developed at Orlando Army Air Base in Florida, paired pilots and radar operators early in the training pipeline and kept them together through advanced training and inter-combat assignments. This continuity created teams that functioned with extraordinary efficiency. The best Black Widow crews, those with multiple kills and dozens of successful missions, invariably featured pilot radar operator teams that had trained together and flown together from their first night fighter sortie. Lieutenant Paul Smith and Lieutenant Robert Graham, who achieved 6 confirmed kills together, flew 114 combat missions as a team. Their coordination became legendary in the 492nd Squadron. Graham would detect contacts and begin vectoring Smith toward intercept geometry, before Smith even asked for information. Smith would begin maneuvering based on Graham's tone of voice, recognizing from subtle vocal cues whether the contact was a bomber, fighter, or false return. This level of coordination couldn't be mandated or taught. It emerged from hundreds of hours flying together, learning each other's habits and patterns, developing trust that each would perform his role perfectly. The post-war careers of Black Widow veterans reflected the skills they'd developed during wartime service. Many remained in the newly created United States Air Force, bringing their experience to the development of next-generation fighters and tactics. Others entered civilian aviation, where their instrument flying skills and ability to operate in adverse conditions made them valuable airline pilots. Some entered aerospace engineering, contributing to the development of radar systems, avionics, and fire control systems that would equip future fighters. Lieutenant Colonel Orris Johnson, who commanded the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron through most of its combat operations, retired as a Major General in 1965 after a distinguished career that included commanding fighter wings during the Korean War. His advocacy for advanced radar-equipped fighters influenced Air Force procurement decisions for decades. Major Charles Hughes, another Black Widow veteran, became a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base, evaluating the radar and weapon systems of experimental aircraft. His combat experience informed the requirements for the F-89 Scorpion and F-94 Starfire, ensuring these aircraft incorporated lessons learned from Black Widow operations. The radar operators, whose specialized skills had made them critical to Black Widow success, found themselves in demand as the Air Force developed increasingly sophisticated electronic systems. Many became electronic warfare officers, applying their understanding of radar and electronics to the growing field of signals intelligence and electronic countermeasures. The skills they developed tracking German aircraft on primitive radar scopes translated directly to interpreting more advanced systems in reconnaissance aircraft and strategic bombers. The technological progression from the Black Widow's SCR-720 radar to modern fighter radar systems is direct and traceable. The basic principles — transmit radio waves, receive reflections, interpret returns to determine target location — remain unchanged. But the sophistication has increased exponentially. Modern fighters carry radar systems that can detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles, track dozens of targets simultaneously, discriminate between aircraft types, operate in multiple modes simultaneously, and resist jamming through frequency agile transmission and advanced signal processing. Yet the conceptual foundation was laid by the Black Widow's radar operators, hunched over their scopes in darkness, interpreting blips of light to guide their pilots toward invisible enemies. The cannon armament of the Black Widow, 420mm Hispano cannons, represented the optimal balance between hitting power and ammunition capacity for 1944 technology. Subsequent fighters would experiment with different armament packages. Some, like the F-86 Sabre, returned to rifle-caliber machine guns, accepting reduced destructive power in exchange for more ammunition and lighter weight. Others, like the F-89 Scorpion, carried larger cannon or rocket armament. Eventually, guided missiles replaced guns as primary armament on most fighters, but the concept the Black Widow validated, that concentrated firepower could destroy enemy aircraft reliably, remained central to fighter design. The emphasis shifted from guns to missiles, but the underlying principle of overwhelming destructive capability remained constant. Modern fighters carrying AIM-120 missiles and 20mm Vulcan cannons are the direct descendants of Black Widows carrying Hispano cannons and the mindset that sufficient firepower makes up for other deficiencies. The night fighting mission itself evolved continuously after World War II. The Cold War threat of Soviet bomber attacks on North America required standing air defense patrols by radar-equipped interceptors. The F-89 Scorpion, F-94 Starfire, F-101 Voodoo, and F-106 Delta Dart all served in this role, maintaining the vigilance that Black Widow crews had pioneered. The mission expanded during Vietnam, where night interdiction of enemy supply routes required aircraft that could operate in darkness and adverse weather. The sophistication increased through later conflicts, with night fighting capabilities becoming standard rather than specialized. By the 1990s, the distinction between day and night fighters had largely disappeared. All modern fighters incorporate night vision systems, advanced radar, and precision weapons that function equally well in darkness or daylight. The veterans who flew the Black Widow in combat passed into history, their numbers declining with each passing year. The last significant gathering occurred in 2010, when fewer than 20 Black Widow pilots and crew members remained alive. These men, now in their late 80s and 90s, shared memories of experiences few others could understand. They spoke of the terror and exhilaration of night combat, the pride in mastering a difficult aircraft, the sorrow for comrades lost, the satisfaction of having contributed to victory. By 2025, fewer than 5 Black Widow veterans remain alive, their memories fading, their experiences becoming history rather than living testimony. Within a few years, there will be no one left who flew the Black Widow in combat, no one who experienced the unique challenge of hunting enemy aircraft through darkness using primitive radar and coordinated crew action. The aircraft itself will remain in museums, preserved as historical artifacts. The combat records will remain in archives, documenting missions and victories. but the lived experience, the sensations and emotions and psychological realities of Black Widow combat will be lost except for what was recorded in memoirs and interviews. The final assessment of the Black Widow's impact on World War II and subsequent military aviation must acknowledge both its immediate combat effectiveness and its longer-term conceptual influence. In immediate terms, the aircraft achieved air superiority during hours of darkness over both European and Pacific theatres. It destroyed enemy aircraft, interdicted enemy ground movement, and provided reconnaissance capabilities that would have been impossible without its radar systems. The psychological impact on German and Japanese air operations was profound, with enemy forces essentially ceding nocturnal airspace to Allied control. In longer-term influence, the Black Widow established the template for all subsequent radar-equipped fighters. The two-person crew, the integration of advanced sensors with powerful weapons, the emphasis on all-weather capability, the multi-role flexibility, all became standard features of fighter design. Every modern fighter, from the F-15 Eagle to the F-35 Lightning II, incorporates concepts that the Black Widow pioneered. The aircraft's ungainly appearance, which caused German pilots to underestimate it initially, masked revolutionary capabilities that changed warfare fundamentally. The twin-boom configuration, the pressurized central nacelle, the massive wing area, all served purposes that weren't immediately obvious. The design wasn't elegant in the way that Spitfires or P-51s were elegant, but it was functional in ways that transcended aesthetics. Form followed function ruthlessly, with every design element serving operational requirements. The result was an aircraft that looked strange but performed superbly in its intended role. The comparison between the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-61 Black Widow is instructive. Both aircraft were American designs that Germans initially mocked for their size and unconventional appearance. Both proved devastatingly effective in combat, achieving dominance through firepower, ruggedness, and technological sophistication, rather than traditional fighter virtues of speed and maneuverability. Both represented American industrial philosophy, applying overwhelming resources and advanced technology to achieve military objectives. The Thunderbolt evolved from joke to juggernaut over 18 months of combat, gradually earning German respect through accumulated victories. The Black Widow never needed that evolution. From its first combat mission, it demonstrated capabilities that shocked and terrified enemy pilots. There was no learning curve, no gradual acceptance, no transition from mockery to respect. The Germans encountered the Black Widow and immediately recognized it as a superior weapon against which they had no effective counter. The laughter that had greeted the P-47 never materialized for the Black Widow. German pilots saw it, encountered its capabilities, and felt only fear. The psychological transformation that took 18 months for the Thunderbolt occurred instantly for the Black Widow. One encounter was sufficient to understand the hopelessness of fighting an enemy that could see through darkness while you remained blind. The strategic impact of Black Widow operations extended beyond simple aircraft kills. By achieving air superiority at night, the United States eliminated Germany's and Japan's ability to operate aircraft around the clock. This forced enemy air forces into daylight operations where they faced overwhelming Allied fighter superiority or ceased operations entirely. The compression of enemy operational windows created cascading effects throughout their military establishments. Supplies couldn't be moved, troops couldn't be repositioned, reconnaissance couldn't be conducted, all because the night belonged to American radar-equipped hunters. The economic impact was equally significant. Germany and Japan invested enormous resources in night fighter forces, developing specialized aircraft, training crews, establishing elaborate ground control systems. The Black Widow rendered these investments largely useless. German He-219 night fighters, sophisticated and capable, were outclassed by American aircraft that arrived later but incorporated superior technology. Japanese night fighters barely existed, with Japanese industry never achieving the technological base necessary to compete. The Allies, through focused industrial effort and systematic technological development, achieved dominance that enemy forces couldn't challenge. The human cost of Black Widow operations was borne disproportionately by enemy forces. German and Japanese air crews died by the hundreds, killed by an enemy they often never saw. The survivors carried psychological trauma that rivaled or exceeded that of the American crews. Being hunted by an invisible enemy, Watching comrades destroyed without warning or chance to fight back created helplessness that broke even veteran pilots. The few German and Japanese airmen who survived multiple Black Widow encounters described the experience as the most terrifying of their combat careers. Luftwaffe pilots who had faced the RAF during the Battle of Britain, who had flown the Eastern Front, who had survived years of combat, identified Black Widow encounters as uniquely horrifying. The explanation is straightforward. Humans can face visible enemies, can accept risk when they understand the threat, can fight with courage when they see what they're fighting. The Black Widow removed all these psychological supports. It was invisible, incomprehensible, unstoppable. Fighting it meant dying without understanding what killed you. This psychological warfare dimension, never explicitly planned, proved as effective as the physical destruction. The preservation efforts for surviving Black Widows reflect growing recognition of the aircraft's historical significance. The restoration at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum, ongoing for over 20 years, aims to return that aircraft to flying condition. The technical challenges are immense. Original SCR-720 radars don't exist in working condition. The 20mm cannons require specialized parts no longer manufactured. The R-2800 engines, while still available from other restored aircraft, need extensive overhaul. The electrical systems must be completely rebuilt using modern components that replicate original functionality. The effort requires thousands of volunteer hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet the work continues, driven by understanding that once the last flying Black Widow is lost, something irreplaceable will have vanished. The ability to see the aircraft in flight, to hear its engines, to watch it maneuver, provides understanding that static museum displays cannot convey. The few flight veterans still alive support these restoration efforts with information and encouragement. They understand that the aircraft represents not just their own service but a turning point in military aviation. The Black Widow was the first of its kind, the prototype for all radar-equipped fighters that followed. Preserving it preserves a lineage that extends to every fighter flying today. The youngest Black Widow veteran still living is 97 years old as of 2025. He was 18 when he served as a radar operator in the Pacific Theater, flying missions from Okinawa in the war's final months. His memories, recorded in oral history interviews, capture the experience of young men thrust into technological warfare they barely understood. He speaks of the wonder of radar, which seemed like magic in 1945, of the terror of night combat over an ocean that appeared as infinite darkness, of the satisfaction when his guidance brought his pilot into position for successful intercepts. He speaks of friends lost to accidents and combat, of the exhaustion that came from flying 4-hour missions in darkness, of the pride in serving with distinction. His voice carries emotion even 75 years later. The experience is burned into memory with intensity that time hasn't dimmed. When he passes, likely within the next few years, the last living connection to Black Widow combat operations will be severed. Historians and researchers will continue studying the aircraft and its operations, analysing mission reports and combat records, but the lived experience will be gone. This is the inevitable progression of history as living memory transforms into documented record. The responsibility of current generations is to capture as much of that living memory as possible while it still exists, to preserve the voices and experiences of those who were there, to ensure their stories survive when they cannot. The Black Widow's place in aviation history is secure. It was the first purpose-built radar-equipped night fighter produced in quantity. It achieved combat dominance in its intended role. It established concepts and capabilities that influenced all subsequent fighter development. These facts are undeniable and well documented, but beyond the facts lies the human dimension. The experiences of men who flew impossible missions in darkness, who hunted enemies they couldn't see, who lived with constant danger and psychological stress, who contributed to victory through courage and skill. Their story deserves to be told completely and accurately, without romanticization, but with recognition of what they accomplished and what it cost them. The German pilots who faced them deserve recognition as well, skilled professionals fighting against impossible odds with courage that couldn't overcome technological inferiority. The ground crews who maintained Black Widows in difficult conditions deserve acknowledgement for excellence that kept aircraft operational despite challenges. The radar technicians, armourers, engine mechanics, electricians all contributed to operational success without recognition or glory. The Black Widow's story encompasses all these people, not just the pilots who received medals and promotion. In April 1943, German pilots had laughed at the P-47 Thunderbolt, seeing only its ungainly appearance and poor initial performance. By 1945, those same pilots, if they survived, flew in terror of the Thunderbolt's guns. The evolution took time, required American pilots to learn their aircraft's strengths, demanded tactical innovation to exploit capabilities that weren't immediately obvious. The Black Widow required no such evolution. From its first combat appearance in July 1944, it was the dominant nocturnal predator. German pilots who encountered it didn't laugh. They died, usually without seeing what killed them, or they fled, knowing that engagement meant certain death. The few who survived carried memories of an enemy that seemed supernatural in its capabilities. The laughter died before it could begin, strangled by the realization that American technology had achieved something previously impossible. The P-61 Black Widow entered combat in July 1944 and ended the war having achieved complete air superiority during hours of darkness. In between, 420mm cannons and advanced radar rewrote the rules of nocturnal warfare and buried the Luftwaffe and Japanese air forces under an avalanche of technological dominance. German and Japanese pilots never laughed at the ungainly American night fighter. From its first appearance, they knew they faced their executioner. The darkness that had protected them became the medium through which American radar found them, and American cannons killed them. The thunder of daytime combat belonged to P-47s and P-51s. The silent death of nocturnal hunting belonged to the Black Widow. By May 1945 in Europe and August 1945 in the Pacific, there were no enemy pilots left to fear the night hunter. They were dead, captured, or grounded by fuel shortages and hopelessness. The Black Widow had spoken, and the night belonged to America,